Hi guys, welcome to the last of our reproductive lessons for the sexuality and reproduction block, the physiology lessons, last of those. This one's on pregnancy. This is a little bit of an outline of what we're going to talk about here. In the first video, we'll talk about fertilization and growth within the oviduct and transport to the uterus. In the second video, we'll cover implantation all the way down to the placenta here, and then the last video will cover the hormones, many of which will be mentioned up here, and then parturition and lactation. Okay, so let's get started. Fertilization. So this is the organ that has brought so much joy to the world, and the female reproductive tract. And sort of as we described in the male reproductive lesson, you get a lot of sperm deposited here in the vagina, about 250 million, give or take, up to about 400 million. But when you look at how many of those sperm actually get past the cervix into the uterus, it's only about 100,000. So there's a big drop off here between these two spots. And then if you look at how many actually make it up the oviduct to get near, to get anywhere near the ovum, you're talking about only about 50 of this 250 million sperm here. So there's quite a process of weeding out the weak, if you like, so that only the strong survive as they get closer to the ovum. And of course, all of this is facilitated by all of the things that we talked about in the female reproduction lesson: peristalsis, ciliary movement, mucus flow, things like that are all sort of working to bring the sperm and the ovum together so that fertilization can take place. So this slide is sort of an overview of what happens. So we have our sperm and we have our hybridmodal state, and it approaches and it burrows in through the corona radiata, and basically it manages to tunnel through the zona pellucida, which is probably the biggest barrier to fertilization, as you can see here. And then once you get a pathway through the barriers and the sperm has burrowed its way through, the fertilization has taken place, where the contents of the cytosol of the sperm, basically most importantly the nuclear material, is sort of added to the cytosol of the oocyte here, the egg, and that is basically through a process of endocytosis. We'll look at the details in a moment. And then once that happens, you'll recall from the female reproductive lesson that the DNA of the ovum is suspended partway through the second meiotic division, and that division doesn't complete until fertilization takes place. So once this nuclear material makes its way into the cytosol, you get the continuation of the second meiotic division. You get a second polar body that joins the first, and genetic recombination takes place. So, and of course, yes, we have winner take all during this process. As we'll learn in a moment, the zona pellucida, once one sperm gets through, it hardens to try to keep the rest of these sperm out, so that only one sperm makes it in, the winner, and does the fertilization. So here's a slide. It's got nice step-by-step details of what's happening here during this fertilization process. The sperm makes its way past the follicular cells and the corona radiata to the zona pellucida, and it binds to the zona pellucida, okay? And when that happens, you get a rise in calcium inside the sperm, and that triggers exocytosis of the acrosomal enzymes. There are hydrolytic enzymes in that acrosomal head, you'll recall from the male reproductive lesson, and exocytosis is initiated. This is called the acrosomal reaction, and these enzymes are released locally onto the zona pellucida, and when that happens, these enzymes from the acrosomal cap dissolve the zona pellucida locally, okay? And so you get the zona pellucida sort of dissolving away where the sperm is trying to get in and flopping away and trying to make its way in. Eventually, what you get is what amounts to endocytosis. Like I said, you know, the head of the sperm makes its way in, and eventually the cell membrane of the sperm fuses with the cell membrane of the egg, the oocyte, and you get endocytosis of the contents of the sperm cytosol, including the nuclear material. Okay, that triggers a rise of calcium in the oocyte. And in response to that rise in calcium, see these vesicles here? They're called cortical vessels. These release enzymes onto the zona pellucida. These vesicles are just underneath the membrane, and that hardens the zona pellucida. That's the cortical reaction is the process by which you harden that zona pellucida to keep the rest of the sperm that are all trying to get in out. So that hardens this layer so the other sperm can't dissolve that layer away and get in. Okay? The rise in calcium also induces completion of the second meiotic division, and then what happens is these two nuclei come together and fuse, and you get a genetic recombination and a new thing. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what happens after that before we finish up on this video. Growth in the oviduct and transport to the uterus. The developing embryo spends several days in the oviduct, traveling to the uterus, of course, and it is developing as it goes. So the 4 to 8 cell stage is called a morula. I believe you'll be learning a lot more detail, this in a lot more detail from the embryology people, and if you haven't already learned it already. But you go through this stage during that transport process, and you end up as a blastocyst, which is the 32 to 64 cell stage, and that is the stage at which you begin the process of implantation, which we'll talk about soon. So here's the process. This figure is nice. We start with fertilization and we go around counterclockwise. Fertilization takes place. The fetus, I guess at this point, sort of is the cells are duplicating, and you've got mitosis taking place, and you're building, and you end up as a morula during the transport stage, and then within the uterus you end up with a blastocyst 5 to 6 days after fertilization. Okay, and it's this blastocyst that's going to implant. So let's drop off there. We'll talk about the process of implantation. We'll pick it up in the next video. Thank you for your attention.